Hey guys, tonight we are going to take a bath. Not just any bath, though. We're traveling back to a time when the simple act of getting clean was a public spectacle, a business transaction, and, if you were unlucky, a potential death sentence. The world of the medieval public bathhouse was a steamy, strange, and contradictory place. Let's be honest. Your 21st century immune system probably wouldn't last a day in the kind of water we're about to step into. But that's what makes this so fascinating. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I love seeing how far these stories travel. So let me know in the comments where you're re-listening from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always a little magical to think about all of us, scattered across the globe, sharing this moment. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the cold. It's a damp, insistent cold that seems to seep not just through the wattle and daub walls of your small, rented room, but right into your bones. It's the year 1345. Let's say, in a bustling but grimy English town. You pull the thin wool blanket tighter around your shoulders, but it does little to help. The straw-stuffed mattress beneath you rustles with every small movement, and you suspect you're not the only living thing nestled within it. Outside, the world has gone dark. The only light in your room comes from a single, sputtering tallow candle, casting long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn timbers. It gives off a smell like hot, greasy meat, a scent that coats the back of your throat. This is the baseline of your existence, a world lit by fire and scented by mud, wood smoke, and unwashed bodies. You can hear the distant, lonely clang of the curfew bell, a nightly reminder from the church that honest folk should be indoors, safe from the perils of the unlit streets. And then, a sharp rap on your wooden door. It's your neighbor, Thomas, a weaver with a mischievous glint in his eye. He doesn't need to say much. He just grins, jerks his head towards the street, and says the most wonderful word you could possibly hear on a night like this: baths. It's not a question, it's a salvation. The thought alone is enough to make you forget the cold. The promise of steam so thick you can't see your own hand. Of water hot enough to finally you ink the muscles in your back. Of a place where the chill can treat you. You're not eagerly grabbing a small linen towel, one of your more prized possessions, and your worn leather shoes. Stepping out of your building is like plunging into another world. The street is not a street in the modern sense, it's a river of thick, sucking mud, a treacherous soup of rainwater, kitchen scraps, and animal droppings. There are no sidewalks, no street halted. The moon is your only guide. You and Thomas stick close to the walls of the buildings, navigating by memory. The upper stories of the houses jut out over the street, almost touching in some places, creating a tunnel-like effect that makes the darkness even more absolute. Every so often, a window squeaks open above, and a voice might cry "Gardy-loo," a warning to watch below before the contents of a chamber pot are unceremoniously added to the sludge at your feet. It's a well-known urban hazard. This is the reality of medieval city life that made the public bathhouse not just a luxury, but a necessity for the soul. Historians still debate just how dangerous the average city street was after dark. Some surviving court records paint a picture of a terrifying gauntlet where robbers and cutthroats lurked in every shadow. Others suggest that for the locals who knew the rhythms of their neighborhood, it was simply a familiar, if unpleasant, commute for you. Tonight, it's just the price of admission. You can hear pigs slaughtering in a nearby alley, a common sight as they were the city's unofficial, four-legged sanitation department, eating much of the refuse that would otherwise pile up. It's a strange and pungent form of recycling. As you walk, Thomas describes what awaits you. Not just the water, but the wine they serve, the gossip you'll hear, maybe even a bit of music if a traveling minstrel is there. It sounds like an oasis, a pocket of warmth and light and life carved out of the cold, dark world, and then you see it, down the lane, the room, Orange glow spills from a heavy oak door. You can hear the faint sound of laughter and splashing. A muffled, joyous sound that cuts through the night. It's the bathhouse. An invitation to leave the grime and the cold behind, if only for a few hours. You pick up your pace, your feet squelching in the mud, eager to step through that door and into the steam. The glow you saw from down the lane intensifies as you draw closer, resolving into the welcoming rectangle of an open doorway. The building itself is a little larger and more robust than the neighboring houses, built with thick oak timbers and a stone foundation that seems to promise stability in this shifting, muddy world. Above the door, swinging gently in the night air, is the unmistakable sign of a public bathhouse. It's not a written sign. Literacy isn't something you can count on in the general populace, but a symbol everyone understands: a long pole with a green, leafy bush tied to the end. Some establishments use a wreath of branches, an ancient nod to the Romans who started this whole tradition. But the message is the same. This is a place of water, warmth, and welcome. The sounds are clearer now. Not just laughter, but a whole cacophony of life. The high-pitched chatter of a group of women. The deep baritone of a man telling a story. The rhythmic thwack, 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 thwack of something you can't quite identify. And underneath it all, the constant, gentle sloshing of a large body of water. A man stands framed in the doorway, his silhouette blocking some of the light. This is the bathkeeper, or the restorative, as HES sometimes called. HES, a broad-shouldered man with a leather apron slick with moisture, and his face is perpetually flushed from the heat of his trade. He sees you and Thomas approaching, and a professional smile spreads across his face. He doesn't need to shout his wares, his presence is advertisement enough. Good evening to you, sirs, he booms, his voice friendly but with a clear, transcational edge. Escape the chill. We have hot tubs for soaking, a steam room to sweat the sickness out, and fresh river water, changed just this Tuesday. You glance at Thomas. Tuesday, it's Friday night. The water is already 3 days old. Thomas just gives a slight, almost imperceptible shrug, as if to say, it's better than nothing. The bathkeeper, noticing your hesitation, adds to his pitch, and for a few pennies more, a shave and a haircut. Get rid of that winter scruff. He gestures with his thumb towards the interior. Come in, out of the muck. At the entrance, there's a crude wooden scraper for you to clean the thickest mud from your shoes. As you do, you notice a bundle of leafy twigs hanging from a peg on the wall. They look like birch branches, tied together at the base to form a sort of wisp. You've seen these before. They're for swatting your own skin or having a friend swat it for you in the steam, meant to get the blood flowing and open the pores. It's a curious practice, a kind of violent-looking self-care that feels oddly invigorating. Some of the more luxurious bathhouses even have special attendants who do the swatting for you. You can't quite tell if this bathkeeper is the sole proprietor or part of a larger, official organization. It's a point historians still puzzle over the degree to which bathhouses were regulated. In some larger cities, they were run by powerful guilds with strict rules about pricing, hours of operation, and even the separation of men and women. In other, smaller towns, it might have been more of a free-for-all, with each keeper running his establishment as he saw fit. This man's confident air suggests he knows his business. But whether that authority comes from a city charter or simply from being the owner of the biggest copper cauldrons in town is impossible to say. Thomas, a regular here, handles the negotiation. 2 to the hot bath, he says, holding up 2 fingers. The bathkeeper nods and states the price. It's not cheap, perhaps the cost of a loaf of bread or a few cheap candles, but for the promise of a few hours of blissful, bone-deep warmth, it feels like a bargain. You fish the coins out of the small pouch tied to your belt. They're grubby and worn, but they're accepted with a practiced scoop of the keeper's hand. Go on through, he says, gesturing past him. Leave your worries in the cold behind. You step over the threshold. The air inside is immediately, shockingly different. It's thick, rough, and humid, carrying a dozen new smells: damp wood, hot stone, a faint whiff of wine, and the undeniable, slightly musty scent of a large volume of hot water that has been inhabited by many, many people. It's the smell of communal humanity. To your right is a heavy wall curtain, separating this small antechamber from the main event. It billows slightly, releasing a fresh wave of steam and muffled voices. This is the next barrier. Beyond that curtain lies the changing area, the last stop before you shed the medieval world and your clothes along with it. You take a deep breath of the heavy, wet air and push the curtain aside. Pushing past the heavy curtain, you step into a room that serves as a combination lobby and changing area. The air is even warmer here, the steam from the baths beyond clinging to everything, making the wooden benches along the walls feel slick and damp to the touch. A couple of other men are in here, in various states of undress. One is carefully folding his woolen tunic, a garment of surprisingly good quality, while another is just pulling a rough linen shirt over his head. There's a distinct lack of privacy. Modesty is a luxury that doesn't seem to have much currency here. Your eyes are drawn to a long wooden counter where another attendant, younger than the one at the door, is presiding over a collection of baskets. This is the medieval equivalent of a locker room. You're expected to hand over your clothes for safekeeping. Thomas, knowing the routine, starts to unlace his tunic. You follow suit. The clothes you're wearing are likely the only set you own, aside from perhaps a spare shirt. Losing them wouldn't just be an inconvenience, it would be a disaster. The value of clothing was immense. Wills from this period often list specific garments: a single cloak, a fur-lined hat, as significant bequests to be passed down through generations. So the security of this room is paramount. The attendant gestures for you to put your clothes, folded as neatly as you can, into one of the wicker baskets. He then hands you a small, carved piece of wood with a number burned into it. A token. It's your claim check for your entire worldly wardrobe. You clutch it tightly. Losing that small piece of wood would be catastrophic. This system, surprisingly, is a topic of some debate among scholars. While the token system was common, some accounts describe Bathish attendants as notoriously light-fingered. Thefts were a constant concern, and the bathkeeper's liability for stolen goods was a frequent point of legal friction. It's a classic case of trusting a stranger with everything you have. As you strip down to nothing, you're suddenly aware of the stark reality of the medieval body. There are no sculpted gym physiques here. The men are weary, shaped by labor, or paunchy from a diet heavy on bread and ale. Their skin is weathered, crisscrossed with the scars of everyday life: a healed over cut from a clumsy knife, a burn mark from a kitchen fire, the puckered skin of a childhood illness. In this moment of shared nudity, social hierarchies seem to melt away. The well-to-do merchant and the humble artisan are, for a moment, just a naked man seeking warmth. But those class distinctions don't vanish entirely. Thomas leans over and whispers to you, pointing with his chin towards the well-dressed man who is now handing a few extra coins to the attendant. In response, the attendant takes the man's neatly folded clothes and places them not in a standard wicker basket, but in a heavy wooden chest with a large iron lock. This is the premium service. For a higher price, you get better security and, presumably, a guarantee against your tunic ending up accidentally swapped with a lesser one. It's a subtle but clear reminder that even when you're all in the buff, money still talks. A fascinating little detail of the era is that nudity itself was seen with the same shame-filled lens that would later be imposed by Victorian sensibilities. People were born. They often worked, and they certainly bathed in a state of undress with a casual mess that would seem shocking to later generations. Public neck dances in the Bathish was normal, a part of the social fabric. It was the context that mattered. Now completely unclothed and holding nothing but your small wooden token and your linen towel, you feel oddly vulnerable yet strangely liberated. The air is preparing you for the main event. You can see another doorway, this one without a curtain, from which clouds of thick, white steam are billowing. obscuring whatever lies beyond. The sounds of splashing and conversation are much louder now, echoing off what you assume are stone or tiled walls. You look at Thomas. H.E.S. already heading for the steamy archway, his body pale in the dim light of the tallow lamps. He glances back, grins, and gestures for you to follow. You take a final, reassuring squeeze of your wooden token, tucking it securely into a fold of your towel, hoping it stays there. You've paid your fee, surrendered your clothes, and stripped away your place in the outside world. All that's left is to step into the water. You walk towards the archway, the damp wooden floorboards cool beneath your bare feet, and prepare to plunge into the heart of the bathhouse. You pass through the archway and the world dissolves into steam. The change in atmosphere is instantaneous and total. One moment you are in the relatively clear at the changing room. The next you are enveloped in a hot, dense fog that smells of wet stone, human sweat, and something vaguely herbal, as if someone has thrown a bundle of rosemary onto hot coals. The air is so thick with moisture that you can taste it. It coats your skin, your hair, everything. Your vision is reduced to just a few feet in front of you. The figures of other bathers appearing as soft, indistinct shapes moving in the mist. The sound is immense. The room is clearly large, with a high ceiling, and the acoustics turn every sound into a booming, echoing atmosphere. The chatter and laughter you heard from outside are now a wall of noise, bouncing off the unseen walls, but the dominant sound is the water, a great, constant, liquid chorus of slushing, splashing, and dripping that seems to come from every direction at once. As your eyes slowly adjust, the scene begins to resolve itself. You are standing on a stone ledge surrounding a massive, sunken tub. It's not a series of individual baths, but one enormous, communal pool, perhaps 20 feet across, framed with dark, mossy-looking stone. It looks less like a modern swimming pool and more like a natural hot spring that has been tamed and brought indoors. The water is a murky, opaque grey-green, its surface roiling gently from the heat and the movement of the bodies within. And there are so many bodies, dozens of them. Men of all ages are packed into the pool, shoulder to shoulder in some places. Some are sitting on submerged stone benches that run along the edge, their heads and shoulders emerging from the water like pale islands in a foggy sea. Others are standing in the middle, talking in boisterous groups. A couple of young boys are playfully splashing each other near the steps, earning a gruff but not entirely serious reprimand from a nearby man. Thomas is already at the edge, carefully lowering himself down the slippery stone steps into the pool. He winces for a second as the heat hits him, then sighs with a look of pure, unadulterated bliss. He finds a spot on one of the benches and gestures for you to join him. You follow him down the steps. The water is shockingly hot, almost uncomfortably so for a few seconds. But then the heat begins to work its magic. It's a profound, penetrating warmth that goes straight to your bones, chasing out the last of the lingering chill from the night outside. You sink down until the water is up to your neck, and the sensation is glorious. The weight of the world, the grime of the city, the anxiety about your stored clothes, it all seems to lift for a moment, floating away on the steep. This is the central experience, the reason everyone is here. But as you settle in, you start to notice the details of this shared cleansing. The water is not just murky, you can see things floating in it. Bits of straw, stray hairs, and other unidentifiable specks drift lazily past. Someone near you sneezes. A loud, wet explosion that goes directly into the shared water. No one bats an eye. A man on the other side of the pool is vigorously scrubbing his armpits with a rough-looking cloth, sending clouds of dead skin cells into the communal soup. This is the core concept of medieval hygiene that is so alien to the modern mind, the belief that hot water, in and of itself, was the primary cleaning agent. The heat was thought to open the pores and sweat out impurities and disease. The idea that the water itself could be a vector for transmitting germs was simply not part of their understanding of the world. Historians often refer to this as the theory of disease. the belief that illnesses were caused by bad air or foul smells. So, in the medieval mind, the steam-filled, herb-scented air of the bathhouse was seen as fundamentally healthy, a tonic against the stinking miasma of the city streets. The water itself was secondary. Scholars still debate the actual cleanliness of these establishments. Some argue that, given the standards of the time, they were a genuine improvement on not bathing at all. Others point to contemporary accounts that decry the filth, suggesting that even by medieval standards, some baths were notoriously disgusting. As you sit there, submerged in this warm, humans too, you realize that you are participating in a ritual that is as much about social connection as it is about hygiene. You are literally soaking in the same water as your community. It's an act of profound, if unintentional, intimacy. A man to your left offers you a wooden cup of wine, filled from a skin he has floating next to him. You politely decline, but the gesture is telling. This isn't a quiet, solitary soak. It's a party, and you've only just begun to see what's on the menu. After a few minutes of soaking, the initial shock of the heat in the crowd begins to wear off, and you start to see the bathhouse for what it truly is: a vibrant, multi-purpose community center that just happens to be full of water and naked people. This is not a place you come to simply get clean and leave. It's a destination. You could easily spend half a day here. Thomas, now fully relaxed, points with his chin towards a corner of the vast room. There, set back from the main pool on a raised stone platform, are several long wooden tables and benches. It's a dining area. Attendant, identifiable by their linen aprons, move back and forth, carrying trays of food and jugs of drink to bathers who are either sitting at the tables or, remarkably, still in the water. You watch as an attendant carefully wades into the pool, holding a wooden tray high above his head. On it are a small roasted chicken, a hunk of dark bread, and a pewter mug of what you assume is ale or wine. He delivers it to a portly man who has a small, floating wooden board set up in front of him, creating a personal, water-level table. The man thanks the attendant, tears a leg off the chicken with greasy fingers, and takes a hearty bite, all without leaving the comfort of the hot water. The grease from his fingers slicks off into the pool, adding another ingredient to the communal soup. This practice of eating and drinking in the bath was incredibly common. It was part of the experience. The menu was likely simple but hearty: roasted meats, pies, bread, cheese, and of course, vast quantities of alcohol. It transformed the bath from a chore of hygiene into an act of leisure and indulgence. For many people, especially those living in cramped, cold, and uncomfortable homes, the bathhouse was their living room, dining room, and tavern all rolled into one. It was a place to spend disposable income, to celebrate, to treat oneself. Your attention is then drawn to another sound, a melodic plucking that cuts through the din of conversation. In another corner, a man with a long, colorful tunic and a lute is perched on a stool. H.E.S. a minstrel, a traveling musician, and H.E.S. playing a gentle, lilting tune. A small group is gathered on the steps of the pool near him, listening intently. His music adds another layer to the atmosphere, a touch of artistry and entertainment. This was a key function of the bathhouse. It was a stage. Poets might recite their latest verses. Musicians would perform, and storytellers would captivate audiences who were literally a captive audience, steeped in hot water. You can see business being conducted. Two men, their faces serious, are huddled together in a quieter section of the pool. One of them makes a gesture with his hands, as if counting, and the other nods slowly. They are clearly merchants, hammering out the details of a deal. Where better to have a sensitive business discussion than here. There are no walls to overhear, no servants to overhear. The steam provides a curtain of privacy, and the shared nudity creates a strange sense of equality, breaking down the usual barriers of formal negotiation. You might see a master craftsman discussing a commission with a client, or a guild official settling a dispute between members. It was the medieval equivalent of a business lunch or a round of golf. One of the more peculiar and less known aspects of Bathish culture was its role in legal and civic life in some German towns. For instance, certain legal disputes were officially adjudicated in the bathhouse. The neutral, public, and relaxed setting was thought to be conducive to reaching a fair and amicable settlement. Imagine having a small claims court dispute settled while you're both sitting naked in a hot tub. Historians are still piecing together how widespread this practice was, as much of the evidence comes from local town ordinances and legal records. But it speaks volumes about how deeply integrated these places were into the fabric of society. You look around the steamy, noisy, chaotic room. There's food, drink, music, business, and fellowship. It's a microcosm of the entire town, all gathered together in one tub. The church might be the center of the town's spiritual life, and the marketplace the center of its commercial life. But the bathhouse was the center of its social life. It was a place where you could be warm, fed, entertained, and connected to your community. It's so much more than just a bath. It's the vibrant, beating heart of the city, and you are soaking right in the middle of it. The water might be questionable, but the experience is undeniably rich, and you still haven't explored the other services on offer. As you relax into the rhythm of the bath, you start to observe the actual process of cleaning more closely. It's a far cry from a modern lather and rinse routine. The central tool for most people seems to be their own hands, simply rubbing at their skin to loosen the grime, which then dissolves into the shared water. But you also see other implements being put to use. A man near you is using a strigil. It's a curved metal tool, usually made of bronze or iron, with a handle at one end and a blade-like scoop at the other. It's a piece of technology inherited directly from the ancient Romans. He is systematically scraping it across his skin, his arms, his chest, his back, and with each pass, the strigil comes away with a disgusting grey paste of sweat, blood, dead skin, and dirt. He periodically rinses the gunk off the blade into the pool. It's a strangely compelling and repulsive sight, while effective at removing surface filth. The idea of this concentrated grime being added to your bathwater is enough to make you subtly shift a little farther away. Others are using rough, homespun clothes, rubbing themselves down with a vigor that leaves their skin pink and dry. You see no sign of soap, not a single bubble. Soap, as you would know it, was a luxury item, and a rather strange one at that. A form of soap did exist, a concoction typically made from animal fat like mutton tallow and wood ash lye. However, it was harsh, foul-smelling, and often produced in small batches for specific purposes, like fulling cloth in the textile industry, rather than for personal hygiene. The cider, olive oil-based soaps from Castile or the Levant were incredibly expensive, the kind of thing a queen might receive as a diplomatic gift, not something a common weaver would bring to the public baths. So for most people, cleaning was a purely mechanical process: scraping, scrubbing, and soaking. Thomas notices you looking around and explains a local alternative. He points to a wooden bucket on the ledge filled with a coarse, sandy-looking substance. Bran and broken herbs, he says. Good for scouring. You watch as a bather scoops up a handful, plasters it onto his wet skin, and begins to scrub. It's a homemade exfoliant, a gritty paste of milling leftovers and fragrant but ineffective weeds. It probably does a decent job of abrading the outer layer of dirt. But again, it all just ends up back in the pool. This leads you to a fundamental question: what did people think dirt was to the medieval mind? Dirt was primarily the visible, earthy grime you picked up from the street or from manual labor. The concept of microscopic germs, bacteria, or pathogens was non-existent. Cleanliness was a visual and tactile state, not a sterile one. If you looked clean and felt smooth, you were clean. The shared water wasn't seen as a contradiction to this, but as a medium for achieving it. The heat drew out the internal bad humus and loosened the external grime, which could then be scraped away. The water's job was to facilitate this. not to remain pure itself. Historians continue to debate the transition from these mechanical methods to chemical ones. The widespread use of soap. It was a sudden shift but a slow, centuries-long evolution tied to changing trade routes, economic prosperity, and evolving ideas about what the body was. For a long time, the streagil and the scrubbing cloth reigned supreme. A particularly odd and little known tool in some regions was the sweat stick, a smooth, paddle-like piece of wood used not for scraping, but for pressing against the skin to squeeze out sweat, which was believed to be a physical manifestation of the body's impurities. The more sweat you could produce and remove, the healthier you were. You realize you haven't even attempted to wash yet. You brought your own linen towel, which you've kept carefully on the dry ledge. You dip a corner of it into the hot, murky water and begin to rub your arm. The cloth comes away grey. It feels like a futile gesture, like trying to wash your hands in a mud puddle. You're simply redistributing the filth in a new, warmer, and more liquid form. Yet, all around you, people are sighing with satisfaction, looking pleased with their efforts. They genuinely feel cleaner. It's a powerful lesson in historical perspective. You are not just in a different time, you are in a different reality, governed by a completely different set of rules about health, the body, and the physical world. Your modern knowledge makes this place seem like a petri dish, a clay pool. But to the people here, it is a sanctuary of health and wellness, a place to scrape away the outside world and purify the inside. You decide to stop thinking about it so much. You lean your head back against the stone wall, close your eyes, and just let the heat do its work. Maybe they're onto something after all. Pursues it there. Submerged in the soupy warmth, a practical question starts to bubble up in your mind. A question so fundamental you're almost embarrassed you didn't consider it sooner. Where is all this water coming from, and, perhaps more importantly, where is it going? You look around the vast, steamy chamber again, this time with an engineer's eye. Creating and maintaining a massive, heated pool like this in the middle of a 14th century city is no small feat. This isn't just a big wooden tub, it's a significant piece of infrastructure. Your first clue is the heat itself. The water isn't just warm, it's consistently hot. This implies a constant source of energy. In one corner of the room, you can just make out a section of the wall that seems to pulse with a faint, reddish glow, visible even through the thick steam. It's the wall of a massive furnace, or hypercus, another brilliant idea borrowed from the Romans. Behind that wall, a fire is roaring, heating either the stone floor and walls of the bath itself or, more likely, a large copper or lead cauldron. The water is heated in this cauldron and then channeled into the main pool. This required a tremendous amount of fuel wood or charcoal, which was another significant operating expense for the bath keeper. The constant need for firewood is one reason bathhouses were sometimes cited as a public nuisance, due to the smoke and the risk of fire. So that's the heat. But what about the water itself? You're in a city, not next to a natural hot spring. Thomas, who seems to be a font of local knowledge, explains it to you. He points towards a small, grated opening near the floor of the pool. The river, he says simply. Most city bathhouses were built near a river or a stream. A channel, or lead, would be dug to divert water from the river to the bathhouse. This was often a crude, open-air ditch that ran through the city streets, collecting rainwater and refuse along the way before it even reached the baths. So the fresh river water the keeper boasted about was likely already a murky, polluted brew before it even entered the heating cauldron. This brings you back to the keeper's claim that the water was changed on Tuesday. This was likely a massive, all-day undertaking. They would have to open a drain, another grated hole you can now spot on the floor of the pool, and let the entire contents gush out, probably back into the same river it came from, just a little further downstream. Then, the pool would have to be scrubbed of its accumulated sludge, a truly foul job, before the whole process of refiling and reheating could begin. Doing this more than once or twice a week would have been prohibitively expensive and labor-intensive. So for most of the week, The bathhouse operated on a system of topping up, not replacing. As water was lost to splashing and evaporation, a bit more preheated water from the cauldron would be added. This meant that by the time Friday night rolled around, you were bathing in a concentrate of 3 days' worth of communal grime. It's a sobering thought. The specifics of bathhouse plumbing are a subject of ongoing archaeological investigation. While the general principles are understood, the exact designs vary greatly. Some high-end establishments in major continental cities may have had surprisingly sophisticated systems with separate pools for rinsing, aqueduct-fed water, and better drainage. But for a common bathhouse in an English town, a simple river in, river out system was the norm. One of the oddest and least documented aspects of bathhouse water management is what they did during a drought. In summers when the local river ran low, how did they stay in business? Some sources hint at bathhouses using well water, which would have been cleaner but much more difficult to raise in such large quantities. It's likely many simply had to close their doors for a time, a frustrating reality for their cold and dirty clientele. This dependence on the local water table is a part of their history that is often overlooked. Thinking about all this, the fire, the fuel, the diverted river, the crude plumbing gives you a new appreciation for the bathhouse. It's not just a social club, it's a machine, a complex, water processing, heat-generating engine dedicated to the production of comfort. It represents a significant investment of capital under mastery of the practical, if imperfect, technology of the age. A sudden surge of freshly heated water gushes into the pool from an inlet near your feet. It's almost scaldingly hot, and you quickly shift your legs away, but it brings with it a wave of steam and a brief, illusory sense of freshness. For a moment, you can pretend the entire pool has been renewed. You can see how easy it would be to ignore the grubby reality and just give in to the sensation. The system is designed to create an illusion of cleanliness and luxury, and sitting here, with the water swirling around you, you have to admit it's a very effective illusion. Your contemplation of the bathhouse's mechanics is interrupted by a man calling out, "Boy, Peter, a moment." The call is directed at one of the attendants. The same young man you saw at the clothing counter. HES now wading through the waist-deep water, his linen apron soaked through, carrying a collection of tools that look alarmingly out of place in a swimming pool. HES not just an attendant who fetches wine and guards clothes. He's the bathhouse's resident jack of all trades, a purveyor of services that extend far beyond simple hospitality. Peter deftly navigates the crowded pool and arrives at the side of a burly, bearded man who has a thick head of unruly hair. "A trim?" Master Peter asks, his voice practiced and professional. The man nods. Peter then pulls a stool from the poolside into the shallow water. The bearded man sits, his back to Peter, while Peter produces a pair of long, wicked-looking iron shears from a leather pouch tied at his waist. They look more like something for shearing a sheep than for cutting human hair. With a series of surprisingly quick and confident snips, Peter begins to trim the man's hair. The wet clippings fall directly into the bathwater, where they float for a moment like tiny, dark boats before becoming waterlogged and sinking. No one seems to mind. This is part of the package, the full service experience. A haircut and a shave were standard offerings at most public baths. It made perfect sense, the hot water and steams often the hair and beard, making them easier to cut. But Peter's toolkit contains more than just scissors. You watch, fascinated. As he finishes the haircut and the man turns to face him. A shave as well. The man grunts. Peter nods, swapping the shears for a straight razor with a bone handle. He doesn't use any kind of shaving cream or lather. He simply uses the bathwater to wet the man's face and then begins to scrape away the stubble with long, careful strokes of the blade. It's a moment of incredible trust. To let another man hold a bare razor to your throat is one thing, but to do it in a dim, steamy room while you're both sitting in a pool of murky water is another level entirely. These bathhouse attendants, often called bathers or street users themselves, were the ancestors of the modern barber surgeon. Their skills were not limited to grooming. because they possessed sharp tools and a steady hand. Their job description often bled into the realm of minor medicine. They were the first stop for a whole host of bodily complaints. As if on cue, once the shave is complete, another man flags Peter down. This man points to a small, inflamed-looking splinter in his forearm. Peter examines it clinically, then produces a pair of wicked-looking tweezers from his pouch. With a quick, practiced movement, he extracts the splinter, eliciting a sharp hiss from the patient. He then dips a cloth in the bathwater and gives a small wound a cursory wipe. Job done. The line between barbering, minor surgery, and general wellness was almost non-existent. Historians still debate the formal training or qualifications these bath surgeons had. Were they part of a barber's guild with specific regulations? Or did they learn their trade through simple apprenticeship at the bathhouse? The answer likely varies from city to city. In some places, they were highly regulated professionals. In others, they were just handy guys with sharp knives. One of the most peculiar, and thankfully less common, services they might offer was ear cleaning. Using a variety of small scoops and probes, a bath attendant would offer to remove excess earwax. It's a practice that makes modern otolaryngologists shudder, but it was considered a part of comprehensive bodily maintenance at the time. You watch Peter as he moves on to his next client, a man complaining of a toothache. Your eyes widen. Surely not. But yes, from his seemingly bottomless pouch, Peter extracts a terrifying, pliers-like instrument. You decide you don't need to see this particular procedure up close. You turn away, your own teeth aching in sympathy. It's a stark reminder that this place is about more than just leisure. It's a hub of practical, everyday bodily care. In an age without specialized clinics, family doctors, or emergency rooms, the bathhouse filled a crucial gap. It was a one-stop shop for feeling good, whether that meant soaking your weary bones, getting a much-needed haircut, or having a painful tooth yanked out of your head. The man with the shears and the razor was one of the most important people in the room. He was the keeper of appearances, the fixer of minor ailments, the man who helped you present a cleaner, tidier, and perhaps healthier version of yourself to the world. And he did it all from the comfort of a giant, questionable bathtub. You made the wise decision to turn away from the impending dental work, but the sounds are unavoidable. A tense silence falls over the immediate vicinity, followed by a sickening crunch, a muffled groan, and then a splash as the tooth puller, Peter, rinses his grim instrument in the pool. A small cloud of red dissipates into the murky water. The man who was just treated spits a mouthful of blood and water back into the bath, shakes his head as if to clear it, and then, remarkably, gives Peter a grateful nod. This casual, public display of invasive medicine is deeply unsettling to your modern sensibilities, but it's a perfect illustration of the dominant medical theory of the age, humoralism, inherited from the ancient Greeks, particularly Hippocrates and Galen. The theory of the four humors was the absolute foundation of Western medicine for over 500 years. The core idea was that the human body contained four essential fluids, or humus: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A healthy person had these four humors in perfect balance. Sickness, on the other hand, was caused by an imbalance, too much or too little of one humor. Therefore, the goal of nearly all medical treatment was to restore the balance. If you had a fever, it was believed you had an excess of blood, making you too hot and wet. The logical cure removed some of the excess blood. This is where the practice of bloodletting came in, and the bathhouse was the absolute prime location for it. The hot water and steam were believed to thin the blood and draw it to the surface of the skin, making the process easier and more effective. The barber surgeon, like Peter, was the expert practitioner. You now notice a man sitting on the steps of the pool, his arm extended over a small wooden bucket on the ledge. The barber surgeon makes a swift, small incision on the inside of the man's elbow with a tool called a lancet. A stream of dark, crimson blood begins to pour into the bucket. The patient looks pale but serene, confident that this procedure is healing him. The barber surgeon watches the flow with a practiced eye, judging the color and consistency of the blood, waiting until the correct amount has been removed before bandaging the arm. This wasn't some fringe, quack procedure, it was standard medical practice, prescribed for everything from the common cold to melancholy. It was so common that some people underwent routine, preventative bloodletting, much like a modern person might take vitamins. The bathhouse was the ideal venue. It was convenient. The warmth was considered therapeutic, and you could relax and socialize afterward. The amount of blood and other bodily fluids that must have ended up in the communal pool is staggering to consider. But within the humoral framework, it made perfect sense. You weren't contaminating the water, you were purging the sickness from your body, and the water was simply the medium. The tooth pulling you just witnessed was also related to this theory. A tooth was often seen as a sign of a local imbalance or decay, a source of bad humors that needed to be removed entirely. The barber surgeon's pliers were to love rebalancing. The extent to which humoral theory dominated every aspect of health is hard to overstate. Food was categorized by its humoral properties. A cucumber was cold and moist, while pepper was hot and dry. A physician would advise you to eat certain foods to counteract your specific imbalance. Historians still debate the practical outcomes of this system. While the core theory was completely wrong, did some of the advice, like prescribing rest and a simple diet for a fever, actually help people recover by coincidence? It's a complex question. The placebo effect of undergoing a trusted, mainstream medical procedure must have been powerful as well. A particularly strange and niche practice related to this was cupping. The barber surgeon would heat a glass cup and place it on the skin. As the air inside the cup cooled, it created a vacuum that sucked the skin up into it. This was believed to draw out bad humors. For wet cupping, the surgeon would first make small incisions on the skin, so that the vacuum would actively draw blood out into the cup. You see a man on the far side of the pool with a series of perfectly round, purple bruises on his back, the telltale sign of a recent cupping session. You are in a world where the body is not a collection of cells and systems, but a container of volatile, magical fluids. The bathhouse isn't just a spot, it's a medical clinic. The attendant isn't just a barber, he's a healthcare professional. The water isn't just for washing, it's a therapeutic agent for purging, bleeding, and rebalancing your very essence. It's a strange, and frankly terrifying, vision of wellness. The man who had his tooth pulled is now laughing with a friend, a bloody gap in his smile. For him, the system works. Now that you've witnessed the bathhouse's role as a makeshift clinic, you start to pay more attention to the subtler interactions happening all around you. You tune out the sounds of amateur surgery and tune into the conversations. The steam, which at first seemed to obscure everything, now feels like a veil being lifted, revealing the intricate social web of the town. This place is the medieval equivalent of a social media feed, a real-time, unfiltered stream of information, gossip, and commerce. To your right, a group of what you take to be merchants are deep in discussion. Their voices are low, but you catch snippets of their conversation. They're not talking about their health, they're talking about the price of wool in Flanders and the reliability of a certain shipping route across the channel. One man, gesturing with a wine-soaked hand, complains about a new toll being levied by a local lord. Another counters with a rumor he heard about a competing guild trying to undercut their prices. This isn't idle chatter. This is crucial, market-sensitive information being exchanged in an environment of relative trust and privacy. Deals are being forged, partnerships tested, and reputations made or broken, all while sitting shoulder to shoulder in a tub of tepid water. A little further away, two men who carry themselves with a more martial bearing are talking. They are likely men-at-arms or perhaps even knights, their bodies leaner and more scarred than the merchants. They aren't talking business, they're swapping stories of a recent campaign, complaining about the quality of the rations, and making grim jokes about the incompetence of their commander. This is how news from the wider world travels, not through newspapers, but through personal testimony, passed from one person to the next in places just like this. But it's not all serious business and war stories. The bathhouse is a puzzle, a hub for gossip. You can hear a group near the steps dissecting the recent marriage of a prominent citizen's daughter. Was it a good match? Did you see the dress? Is it true the dowry was smaller than expected? The conversation is a flurry of speculation, innuendo, and judgment, all delivered with a conspiratorial glee in a world with no mass media. The bathhouse served as the town's living newspaper, tabloid, and gossip column rolled into one. It was here you found out who was in trouble, who was successful, and who was sleeping with whom. One of the most surprising undebated aspects of bathhouse society is the presence of the clergy. In theory, the church often condemned the baths as places of idleness and moral laxity. Yet, right there, not 10 feet from you, is a man you recognize as a local friar. His tonsure de haircut is unmistakable. H.U.S. listening with a smile to a story being told by a baker, whose flour-dusted eyebrows are a dead giveaway of his trade. The friar's presence isn't scandalous, it seems perfectly normal. Many religious orders had their own private baths, but it wasn't uncommon for individual monks and priests to frequent the public ones. It was a way for them to connect with their flock, to hear the confessions of the heart if not the soul, and to simply be a part of the community they served. The official stance of the church and the day-to-day practice of its representatives were often two very different things. A lesser-known social function of the bathhouse was its role as a welcome center. When a traveler or a new resident arrived in town, a trip to the bathhouse was often one of their first stops. It was the quickest way to get plugged into the local network, to learn the town's customs, to meet key people, and to wash off the literal and figurative grime of the road. You can spot a newcomer easily. He looks slightly lost, his eyes wide, just as yours were an hour ago. You watch as a local regular engages him in conversation, and soon the newcomer is being offered a cup of wine and brought into a circle of chatter. He is being interrupted. You are witnessing the construction of community in its most elemental form. People are talking, sharing, arguing, laughing, and connecting. They are reinforcing social bonds, exchanging information, and collectively making sense of their world. In an era where life was often dictated by rigid hierarchies, lord and peasant, master and apprentice, clergy and laity, the bathhouse was a great equalizer. The shared nudity and the informal atmosphere allowed for a level of social mixing that was rare in the outside world. Here, the baker could share a joke with the friar, and the soldier could listen to the merchant's troubles. You're not just in a pool of water, you're in a pool of information, a literal melting pot of society. And the most interesting whispers, you suspect, are yet to come. Your gaze drifts across the steamy expanse, and you begin to wonder about the other half of the population. So far, this has been an entirely male experience. Where are the women? Was this communal soaking, gossiping, and tooth-pulling an exclusively masculine affair? Thomas, who seems to have a sixth sense for your unspoken questions, gestures with his head towards a heavy, closed wooden door at the far end of the chamber. That way, he says. You come back on a Tuesday or a Thursday. Those are the women's days. This reveals a crucial aspect of bathhouse management's aggregation. While the image of a chaotic, mixed-gender bathing free for all is a popular one and not entirely without historical basis, most reputable public bathhouses in Christian Europe practiced some form of separation. This was often done by time, allocating specific days of the week for men and others for women. In larger, more luxurious establishments, they might have entirely separate facilities, with two distinct wings of the building, each with its own pools and attendants. This door in front of you likely leads to such a separate, parallel universe. The church was a major proponent of this segregation, constantly issuing edicts and warnings against the moral dangers of mixed bathing. They feared, with some justification, that it would lead to licentiousness and sin. The bathhouse keepers, wanting to stay in the good graces of the authorities and attract a respectable clientele, including families, generally complied. So what was happening on the other side of that door? or on a Women's Day, the scene would have been both strikingly similar and subtly different. The core experience was the same: the pleasure of the hot water, the escape from a cold and drafty home, the social connection. Women, just like men, came to the baths to relax, to talk, and to take care of their bodily needs. For many women, especially those confined to the domestic sphere, a trip to the bathhouse was one of the few socially sanctioned opportunities to leave the home and socialize freely with their peers. It was their equivalent of the tavern or the guildhall. Here, they could escape the watchful eyes of husbands and fathers, share news, offer each other support, and build female-centric social networks. Their conversations would have revolved around their own worlds: the challenges of running a household, the price of food in the market, news of births and pregnancies, and, of course, a healthy amount of gossip that would rival anything happening on the men's side. The bathing process itself might also have had a different focus. While men's grooming centered on shaves and haircuts, women's bathing rituals were often more elaborate. They brought their own perfumed oils, herbal infusions to add to the water, and special combs made of ivory or boxwood. There was a greater emphasis on skin care and hair care. A surprising amount of medieval art depicts women in the bath, often with their long hair unbound, combing it or dressing it with the help of attendants or friends. One peculiar and little-known element of the women's bathhouse experience was its connection to major life events, particularly marriage. It was a common custom for a bride and her female friends and relatives to have a ritual bath together the day before her wedding. It was a rite of passage, a moment of cleansing and preparation for her new life, accompanied by songs, special foods, and a fair bit of frank, woman-to-woman advice about the wedding night. Historians studying private letters and household accounts have pieced together these prenuptial bathing parties, which were an important female-led tradition. Now, the big question: did the segregation always work? The answer, according to many contemporary sources, is a resounding no. The line between the men's and women's sections, or men's and women's days, was often porous. Some less reputable bathhouses openly flouted the rules, advertising mixed bathing as an attraction. Even in more respectable places, rules could be bent. There are court records of men being fined for sneaking into the women's section on the wrong day. The very door that was meant to enforce moral order often became a symbol of temptation. The entire issue of gender and bathing is a point of significant academic discussion. Some scholars argue that the emphasis on segregation in the historical record is more prescriptive than descriptive. It's what the church wanted to happen, not what actually happened. They point to art and literature from the period that cheerfully depicts men and women bathing together. Other historians argue that these depictions are often allegorical or satirical, not documentary. The reality was likely a messy spectrum, from strictly segregated, church-approved baths to rowdy, openly mixed establishments that blurred the line between bathing and entertainment. You look at that solid wooden door again. It represents a whole other world of experience, parallel to your own, a world of women's stories, rituals, and social bonds, echoing the one you're in but with its own distinct character. The bathhouse was not a single, monolithic entity. It was a flexible space that catered to the deeply gendered realities of medieval society. And, as you're about to find out, sometimes those separate worlds collided in ways that made the church very nervous indeed. As you ponder the separate worlds of men and women within the bathhouse, the figure of the friar you noticed earlier catches your attention again. HES now engaged in a lively debate with a stonemason, both of them gesturing emphatically, steam rising from their animated hands. The very presence of a churchman in this environment of nudity, commerce, and gossip seems like a contradiction. This contradiction lies at the heart of the church's long and deeply complicated relationship with the public baths. It was a centuries-long affair of simultaneous condemnation and participation. On one hand, you have the official doctrine, thundered from the pulpits during Sunday sermons. Preachers and moralists frequently targeted the bathhouse as a den of iniquity, a ship of fools destined for hell. They railed against a host of perceived sins that flourished in the steam. The first was sloth, or idleness. Spending hours languishing in hot water was seen as a waste of time that could be better spent in prayer or productive labor. It was an indulgence that softened the spirit and made one lazy. Next came gluttony, the free-flowing wine and ale. The platters of roasted meat consumed in the water, it was all seen as a shameless display of excess. For the church, which preached fasting and moderation, the bathhouse was a temple to earthly appetites. Then there was vanity, the endless grooming, the prating, the concern with one's physical appearance. This was all condemned as a sin of pride, a focus on the corruptible flesh rather than the immortal soul. And, of course, the greatest sin of all, lust. Moralists saw the bathhouse, with its casual nudity and its mixing of people in a state of relaxation and intoxication, as a direct path to temptation. They wrote lurid cautionary tales about decent folk who entered the baths for a simple wash and were led astray into sinful thoughts and even more sinful acts. The very warmth and moisture of the environment were seen as morally suspect, creating a climate where sinful passions could sprout like weeds. As one preacher put it, this official condemnation is well documented in sermons, theological treatises, and penitential manuals for priests on assigning penance. But if the baths were so wicked, why is that friar over there looking so perfectly at home? This is the other side of the story. The church, as an institution, was also a major landowner and a participant in the secular economy. In many towns, the local monastery or cathedral actually owned the public bathhouse. They rented it out to a keeper and collected a handsome profit. This created a rather awkward situation where the church was financially benefiting from an institution it was simultaneously condemning from the pulpit. It was a classic case of do as I say, not as I do. Furthermore, the church's teachings on hygiene were themselves contradictory. While they warned against vanity, they also inherited a monastic tradition that valued cleanliness as a sign of respect for God's creation, the human body. Many monastic orders had their own highly regulated bathing schedules. They saw a difference between a functional, cleansing bath and the hedonistic, social bathing of the public establishments. The academic world is still trying to unravel this tangled relationship. Was the church's condemnation genuine moral outrage, or was it a rhetorical tool used to maintain moral authority? Even as its members partook in the very activities they preached against, the answer is likely both. Different factions within the church held different views, and the official stance could shift depending on the local bishop or the prevailing moral climate. One of the most fascinating and little-known aspects of this dynamic was the medicinal bath loophole. The church was generally more accepting of bathing if it was done for legitimate health reasons, as prescribed by a physician to balance the humors. This created a convenient justification for clergy and devout lay people to visit the baths. You could always claim you weren't there for idle pleasure, but for a prescribed medical treatment, or so to cure your excess of black bile, for instance. So the friar in the tub is not necessarily a hypocrite. He might be there for his health. He might be there to minister to his flock in an informal setting, or he might simply be a man of his time, seeing no inherent conflict between his faith and the simple, human pleasure of a hot bath. He represents the messy, on-the-ground reality that so often defies the neat, black-and-white pronouncements of official doctrine. The bathhouse existed in a state of permanent tension with the church, a place both cursed and frequented, a source of both sin and rental income. And as you're beginning to suspect, the preacher's warnings about lust weren't entirely unfounded. As the evening wears on and the wine flows more freely, you begin to notice a subtle shift in the bathhouse's atmosphere. The loud, boisterous conversations of the early evening are starting to give way to quieter, more intimate exchanges. The air, already thick with steam, now seems charged with a different kind of energy, a current of unspoken invitations and suggestive glances. You're starting to see the hidden bathhouse, the one the preachers warned about. Your attention is drawn to a man who has been sitting alone near the edge of the pool. H.E.S. well dressed, or at least his clothes in the changing room probably weren't. He has the soft hands of a man who doesn't perform manual labor. He catches the eye of the bathkeeper, The main proprietor who was at the door when you came in, the keeper, who has been observing the room like a hawk all night, gives a nearly imperceptible nod. It's a tiny gesture, a flicker of understanding, but it's a clear signal. A moment later, an attendant approaches the lone man. There's a brief, whispered conversation. The attendant then discreetly gestures towards a series of small, curtained alcoves along the back wall of the chamber, away from the main pool. You hadn't paid them much attention before, assuming they were for storage or perhaps private changing areas. Now, you understand they serve a different purpose. The man slips a few coins into the attendant's hand and then casually makes his way out of the pool and disappears behind one of the heavy wall curtains. This is the bathhouse's secret menu. It was perhaps the worst kept secret in the medieval city. While many bathhouses were legitimate, family-friendly establishments, a significant number, especially in larger towns and port cities, openly doubled as brothels. The connection was so strong that in some languages, the word for bathhouse became a euphemism for a house of ill repute. You start to see the signs everywhere now that you know what to look for. You notice certain women, who are not part of a family group and who seem to be working in concert with the bathkeeper. They are the bath attendants or serving wenches whose duties extend far beyond scrubbing backs or serving drinks. One of them shares a knowing look with a merchant, then laughs and leads him away from the boisterous main pool towards a quieter, more secluded corner. The entire operation is run with a kind of plausible deniability. The bathkeeper could claim he is simply providing private rooms for guests who wish to nap or relax away from the noise. The women could claim they are merely employees of the establishment, there to provide service. This ambiguity was crucial. It allowed the business to operate in a legal and moral grey area, often with the tacit approval of city authorities who found it easier to contain and regulate the sex trade in a few known locations rather than have it spill out into the streets. Historians debate how explicit this side of the business really was. Was it an open secret that everyone understood? Or was it a more clandestine affair, arranged through coded language and subtle gestures? The evidence suggests it was a spectrum. In some bathhouses, the transaction would have been as blunt as ordering a meal. In others, it would have been cloaked in layers of euphemism and suggestion. A particularly strange and little-known aspect of this was the role of the linen. In some German ordinances, bathhouses that also functioned as brothels were referred to as linen baths. This is believed to refer to the fact that these establishments provided beds with linen sheets in their private rooms, a luxury that clearly signaled a service beyond mere bathing. The quality of your sheets could be an advertisement for the quality of your illicit offerings. You see another transaction. A group of young, rowdy squires, their inhibitions washed away by ale, call over one of the female attendants. There's some coarse joking under flash of coins. The attendant, maintaining a professional but weary smile, leads them not to the private alcoves, but up a narrow stone staircase you hadn't noticed before, tucked away in a dark corner. There is, it seems, an entire upper floor dedicated to this side of the business. It's a stark reminder of the multifaceted nature of this place. It's a hill spa, a tavern, a community centre, a business lounge, and a brothel, all under one steamy roof. The bathkeeper is not just an innkeeper, he is a restaurateur, a barber, a surgeon, and a pimp. He is managing a complex and morally ambiguous enterprise, catering to the full spectrum of human needs and desires, from the simple pleasure of warmth to the most primal urges. The steam that fills the room doesn't just obscure the view, it blurs the lines between public and private, clean and dirty, virtue and vice. You find yourself mesmerized by the quiet efficiency of it all. The bathkeeper, the man who greeted you at the door, is the conductor of this complex orchestra. He moves through the steamy room with an air of complete command, his eyes missing nothing. AHES orchestrating the flow of wine, the collection of money, the discreet signaling for the private services, and the general mood of the room, all at once. This isn't just a business, it's a finely tuned machine for generating profit from every human impulse. The way this illicit side of the business was managed is a masterclass in medieval entrepreneurship. The bathkeeper, or stewholder, often had a formal or informal arrangement with the city council. In many towns, prostitution was not illegal but regulated. Authorities preferred to have it confined to specific districts or establishments, like the bathhouses, where it could be monitored and, most importantly, taxed. The bathkeeper would pay a hefty license fee or a portion of his earnings to the city in exchange for being allowed to operate without harassment. In a strange way, he was a sanctioned purveyor of vice, a civic contractor for sin. The women themselves often existed in a state of legal limbo. In many cases, they were employees of the bathhouse, their earnings split with the keeper. This created a relationship of extreme dependency. The keeper provided them with food, lodging often in the bathhouse itself, and a degree of protection from the dangers of the street. In return, he controlled their lives and took a significant cut of their income. It was a system ripe for exploitation, a fact that did not escape the notice of religious critics. You observe the bathkeeper handle a minor dispute. A customer is arguing with one of the female attendants over the price of a drink. The keeper intervenes instantly. His voice is low but firm, not angry. He listens to both sides, then makes a swift judgment. His authority absolute. The customer grumbles but accepts the ruling. The keeper has to maintain order. A reputation for being unsafe or chaotic would be bad for all aspects of his business, from the family bathers on a Tuesday to the late-night revelers on a Friday. This is a point of ongoing discussion for historians. Were these bathhouse brothels safer for the women who worked in them compared to working independently on the streets? Some argue that the structure, however exploitative, did offer a roof over their heads and a bouncer at the door. Others contend that this just concentrated the power in the hands of one man, the bathkeeper, who could be just as abusive as any street predator, but with the added leverage of being their landlord and employer. A fascinating and little-known legal wrinkle in this business was the concept of clothing liability. In some city statutes, if a woman's client refused to pay, she was legally entitled to hold his clothes as collateral until he settled the debt. Given that a man's clothes were among his most valuable possessions, this was a powerful bargaining chip. Imagine the humiliating walk home for the man who tried to cheat a bathhouse prostitute. This law effectively turned the bathkeeper and his attendants into officially recognized debt collectors. You see the complex financial ecosystem in action. The money from a legitimate haircut goes into the same till as the money from an illicit encounter. The profits from selling wine to a group of gossiping merchants might be used to pay the wages of the women upstairs. It's all interconnected. The bathhouse's success depends on its ability to seamlessly integrate its various functions. The clean side of the business, the bathing, the grooming, the food provides a respectable front end, a steady stream of diverse customers. The dirty side, the secret menu, is the high margin, cash-intensive part of the operation that likely generates the most profit. The bathkeeper is a morally ambiguous figure. Is he a corrupt exploiter of human weakness, as the preachers would claim, or is he a savvy small businessman providing a range of services that are clearly in high demand, all while navigating a complex web of social norms and legal codes? The truth, you suspect, is that he is both. He is a product of his time, a pragmatist catering to a world that is far messier and more contradictory than any sermon would have you believe. He has created a haven for the needs of the body in all their forms: the need for warmth, for cleanliness, for society, and for intimacy. And for now, business is booming. But a shadow is beginning to fall over this world, a threat that will target the very heart of his enterprise, the promise of pleasure through bodily contact. The night has grown late. The crowd in the main pool has thinned out, leaving behind only the most dedicated drinkers and those engaged in the bathhouse's more clandestine offerings. The air, however, remains thick and heavy. As you sit in the warm, murky water, you catch fragments of a new kind of conversation, one spoken in hushed, anxious tones. It's not about the price of wool or local gossip. It's about sickness. A man near you is talking to his friend, his voice barely a whisper. He speaks of a cousin in a port city to the south, a man who has been afflicted with a terrible new ailment. It started with a painless sore, he says, then progressed to a foul, body-covering rash, aching joints, and a fever that addled the mind. The man's friend shakes his head slowly, looking unnerved. H.E.S. heard similar stories. Sailors are bringing it back with them from France or Italy. He murmurs. They're calling it the Great Pox or the French disease. This is the first whisper of a plague that will sweep across Europe with terrifying speed and devastating consequences. It's the late 15th century now. Let's adjust our timeline slightly forward to witness this crucial turning point. You are on the cusp of the first major syphilis epidemic. The disease, a bacterial infection we now know as Treponema pallidum, was a new and terrifying presence in the old world. The historical origin of syphilis is one of the most hotly contested debates in medical history. The Columbian theory suggests that Christopher Columbus's crew contracted the disease in the Americas and brought it back to Europe in the 1492, where it spread like wildfire through a population with no prior immunity. Another school of thought, the pre-Columbian theory, argues that a less virulent form of the disease already existed in Europe, but mutated into a more aggressive strain around this time. Whatever its ultimate origin, its appearance at the end of the 15th century marked a turning point in European society. The men in the pool don't know about bacteria or transatlantic voyages. They are trying to make sense of this new horror within their own framework of understanding. They blame it on a dozen different things: a new alignment of the planets, a punishment from God for the sins of the age. Or most commonly, they blame it on their enemies. The English called it the French pox. The French called it the Neapolitan disease. The Russians called it the Polish sickness, and so on. It was always someone else's fault. What made this disease particularly frightening was its primary mode of transmission. While people didn't understand germ theory, they made the terrifyingly accurate connection that it was spread through sexual contact. This was a disease born of intimacy, and suddenly, places like the public bathhouse, which had for centuries been centers of social and physical connection, began to look very different. A strange and little-known early name for the disease was morbus gallicus, a Latin term that simply means the Gallic disease, again pointing the finger at the French. Early physicians were utterly baffled by it. It didn't fit neatly into the traditional for humors model. Its symptoms were varied and horrific, mimicking other diseases but with a unique and dreadful progression. The men's hushed conversation is filled with fear and misinformation. They talk of the disfiguring sores, the way it can eat away at the nose and palate, the madness it can cause in its final stages. The stories are exaggerated, conflated with other illnesses like leprosy. But the core of terror is real. The very activities that define the bathhouse experience, the casual physical contact, the shared water, the thriving sex raid upstairs, were now being recast as potential vectors for this horrifying new plague. The bathkeeper, who has been walking his rounds, overhears a snippet of their talk. You see his face tighten for just a second. This is more than just a health scare for him, it's an existential threat to his livelihood. His entire business model is built on the premise that this establishment is a place of health, pleasure, and safety. A disease that directly links pleasure to decay and death could unravel everything. You look around the steamy room, which only a few hours ago felt like a warm, welcoming sanctuary. Now, it seems to hold a new, invisible menace. Every shadow seems a little deeper, every whispered conversation a little more ominous. The shared water, once a symbol of community, now feels like a shared risk. The pleasure and intimacy that were the bathhouse's primary currency were about to be devalued by fear. The party was almost over. The Great Pox had arrived, and it was heading straight for the front door of the bathhouse. The fear that was once a hushed whisper in the corner of the bathhouse begins to take on a physical form. The abstract stories about a cousin in the port city are now being replaced by a much more immediate and terrifying reality. You start to see the signs of the Great Pox with your own eyes, right here in the communal tub. You notice a man wince as he shifts his weight on the stone bench. As he moves, his leg comes out of the water for a moment, and you see it a series of angry, reddish-brown spots covering his shin. It's the telltale rash of the disease's secondary stage. The man quickly submerges his leg again, a look of profound shame and fear on his face. He catches you looking and turns away, pulling his shoulders in, trying to become invisible. Suddenly, you see them everywhere. Eamon across the pool has a similar rash on his torso. Another, a young man who looks pale and unwell, has open, weeping sores on his arms, lesions that would make your 21st century mind scream staph infection, but here are just another symptom of this new, all-encompassing sickness. The atmosphere in the bathhouse has changed dramatically. The easy-going camaraderie has been replaced by a tense, nervous watchfulness. People are no longer looking at each other to connect, but to inspect. Every blemish, every cough, every sign of unwellness is now viewed with suspicion. Bathers who would have once crowded together are now subtly trying to keep a small cushion of water between themselves and their neighbors. The very act of sharing the pool has become a source of anxiety. You watch as the barber surgeon, Peter, attempts to ply his trade. He approaches a man to offer a shave, and the man recoils slightly, eyeing the razor with newfound distrust. What if the man shaved before him had the pox? Could the disease be passed on the blade? No one knows the rules of this new plague, and in the absence of knowledge, fear fills the void. Peter's business, once a brisk trade, has slowed to a crawl. No one wants to be touched. The social fabric of the bathhouse is unraveling. A man sneezes, and instead of being ignored, he is met with a flurry of hostile glares. An argument breaks out when one man accuses another of having the evil rash. The bathkeeper has to intervene, his voice taking on a sharper, more desperate edge as he tries to maintain order, but he can't police fear. The academic debate about the virulence of this first syphilis epidemic is intense. Some modern researchers, analyzing skeletal remains from the period, believe the initial strain of the disease was incredibly aggressive, with more severe and visible symptoms than the form we know today. This pathogen host adaptation theory suggests that the disease became less virulent over time as both the bacteria and the human immune system adapted to each other. If this is true, what you are witnessing is the disease at its most terrifying and shocking peak. One of the most tragic and little-known symptoms of this early, aggressive strain was severe bone pain, especially at night. Contemporary accounts describe sufferers being unable to sleep, racked with a deep, agonizing ache in their shins and skulls. You see a man sitting on the steps, his face a mask of quiet misery, and you wonder if he is one of them, seeking the temporary relief of the hot water for a pain that will only return with the moon. The fear is not just of catching the disease, but of being accused of having it. A diagnosis of the great pox was a social death sentence. It was seen as a mark of sin, a physical manifestation of moral corruption. A man with the pox would be shunned by his community, fired from his job, and cast out from his family. This is why the man with the rash on his leg was so quick to hide it. To be visibly sick was to become a pariah. The bathhouse, once a place to see and be seen, has become a place to hide. But there is no hiding in a room full of naked people. The very nature of the establishment, its communal nudity, makes it a terrifying stage for this new drama. Everybody is on display, its health or sickness available for public scrutiny. The murky water that was meant to cleanse and heal now feels like a stagnant pool of contagion and judgment. The steam can no longer hide the truth. The terrifying symptoms are here, floating in the soup with everyone else. And the party has officially turned into a nightmare. The terror of the great pox is matched only by the horror of its supposed cures. As the disease tightens its grip on the public imagination, a new and desperate industry springs up, the industry of treatment. In the absence of any real understanding of the disease, the proposed remedies are a terrifying blend of humoral theory, alchemy, and sheer, panicked guesswork. In a darkened corner of the bathhouse, away from the main pool, you see one of these new treatments being administered. It's a small, enclosed room, almost like a sauna, filled with a thick, metallic-smelling vapor. This is the Jayacom cure. one of the first major treatments to gain popularity. Jaya cum, or holy root, was a dense wood imported from the Americas, the same place the disease was rumored to have come from. The logic was a kind of sympathetic magic. The cure must come from the same land as the curse. Patients would drink a decoction of the wood, then be sealed in a heated room like this one to sweat profusely for hours on end. The goal was to sweat out the pox poison. The man who emerges from the room is drenched and utterly exhausted, but he has a hopeful look on his face. He believes he is being cleansed. But the Jaya cum cure, while grueling, was benign compared to the dominant treatment that would soon take its place: mercury. Alchemists, some physicians, working within the humoral framework, believed that syphilis was a cold and moist disease. Therefore, it needed to be treated with something hot and dry. Mercury, the strange, silvery liquid metal, was considered to have these properties, and so began one of the most brutal chapters in the history of medicine. The barber surgeon, Peter, his regular trade of shaving and tooth-pulling having dried up, has now rebranded himself as a pox specialist. He leads a wealthy-looking patient not to the main bath, but to a private chamber upstairs. You can't see what happens, but you've heard the stories. The treatments were monstrous. Patients might be made to ingest mercury orally, or have it rubbed into their skin in the form of an ointment. The most extreme method was fumigation. The patient would be seated on a chair inside a small tent or box, with a container of mercury being heated from below. They would sit there for hours, their head sticking out the top, inhaling the toxic vapor. The side effects were horrific. The mercury ointments caused skin to burn and peel off. Ingesting it led to violent gastrointestinal distress. The most famous and dreaded effect of all was severe salivation. Mercury poisoning attacks the nervous system and glands, causing patients to drool uncontrollably, sometimes producing pints of saliva a day. This, perversely, was seen as a sign that the treatment was working. The body was expelling the bad humors. The saying among doctors at the time was one night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury. You see a man who has clearly undergone the mercury cure stumble out of one of the private rooms. His teeth are loose in his gums, a common side effect, and he has a tremor in his hands. His face has a strange, metallic sheen. He may have survived the pox for now, but he has been poisoned in the process. He is a ghost haunting the bathhouse, a living testament to the cure being worse than the disease. Historians are still untangling the complex history of these treatments. Why did the mercury cure become so popular despite its obvious horrific effects? Part of the answer is that, in a way, it seemed to work. Mercury can have some bactericidal properties, and it's possible that it temporarily suppressed the visible symptoms of syphilis, like the rash. This gave the illusion of a cure, even as the mercury was causing catastrophic, long-term damage to the patient's body, leading to neurological damage, kidney failure, and death. A lesser-known and even more bizarre cure was based on diet. Some physicians prescribed a diet consisting almost exclusively of raisins and figs for weeks on end. The logic behind this is almost completely lost to time, but it likely had to do with the hot and moist properties assigned to those fruits in humoral theory. Patients would waste away on this restrictive diet, which did nothing to halt the disease's progression. The bathhouse, once a place of simple, tangible remedies like a hot soak or a quick bloodletting, has now become a theater for these new, terrifying, and ineffective cures. The stewholder, ever the pragmatist, has adapted his business model. If people are too scared to bathe, he will rent out his private rooms to the pox doctors and their desperate, wealthy clients. The steam-filled rooms that once hosted illicit trysts are now repurposed into toxic fumigation chambers. The promise of pleasure has been replaced by the desperate search for a cure, a search that often leads to an even more gruesome end. The bathhouse is no longer a place to live for many. It is now a place to die. The fear, the visible symptoms, and the horrifying cures create a toxic brew of panic and paranoia that spills out of the bathhouse and into the city streets. Society needs a villain. It needs a simple explanation for this complex catastrophe. And a convenient scapegoat is right there, steaming and bubbling in the center of town, the public bathhouse itself. You begin to hear the shift in public discourse. The same people who, just a year ago, praised the baths as a source of comfort and community now speak of them with a mixture of fear and contempt. The preachers, who had always been critical, now have fresh, potent ammunition for their sermons. They stand in the pulpits and declare that the great pox is a divine punishment, a scourge sent by God to cleanse the world of the sin and debauchery that festered in places like the bathhouse. The connection is simple, direct, and powerful. The baths are a hotbed of lust. Lust leads to the pox. Therefore the baths are the source of the plague. This narrative takes hold with frightening speed. The bathhouse is no longer seen as a neutral space that was unfortunately infiltrated by a new disease. It is recast as the disease's point of origin, its engine. The communal water, once a symbol of togetherness, is now imagined as a literal syphilis soup, a swelling primordial ooze of contagion. The scientific absurdity of catching syphilis from bathwater is irrelevant. It feels true to a populace desperate for answers. You witness this shift firsthand. You see a woman pull her child away from the door of the bathhouse as they walk past, making the sign of the cross as if to ward off a demonic presence. You hear a group of apprentices on the street corner, who once would have bragged about their exploits at the baths, now telling grim jokes about it being a pox house. The bathkeeper, who used to stand proudly in his doorway, now keeps to the shadows, his face a mixture of anger and despair. The blame game extends beyond just the institution. The people who work there, especially the female attendants, are vilified. They are no longer seen as just serving wenches or even as regulated prostitutes. They are branded as pox spreaders, malevolent figures actively unknowingly infecting the good men of the town. The complex social and economic realities of their lives are erased, replaced by a simple, misogynistic caricature. The academic debate around this period often focuses on the concept of the medical scapegoat. Throughout history, in times of plague and pandemic, societies have consistently sought out a group to blame. This process serves a psychological need. It simplifies a terrifying, invisible threat into a tangible, human enemy that can be punished and controlled. In this case, the bathhouse and its inhabitants fit the role perfectly. They were already associated with moral laxity, making them an easy target for a plague that was seen as a moral failing. A lesser-known aspect of this scapegoating was its economic dimension. Other businesses saw an opportunity. The owners of taverns and ale houses, who had always competed with the bathhouses for the public's leisure spending, were likely all too happy to fan the flames of paranoia. If the baths closed, that was more money for them. Guilds of respectable merchants might petition the city council to shut down the baths, framing it as a public health measure, but perhaps with the underlying motive of removing a perceived blight from their neighborhood. You feel the change in your own social circle when you mention to your neighbor, Thomas, the one who invited you here, that you were thinking of another visit for a simple hot soak. He looks at you with genuine alarm. "Are you mad?" he asks. "Only sinners and the sick go there now." The bathhouse has been successfully rebranded. It is no longer a place for everyone. It has been ghettoized, marked as a place only for the desperate and the damned. The bathkeeper makes a futile attempt to fight back. He hangs a new sign outside, a crudely painted notice declaring his water to be clean and wholesome. But it's no use. You can't fight a moral panic with a sign. The narrative is too strong. The blame has been assigned. The court of public opinion has reached its verdict. The bathhouse is guilty, and a guilty verdict, in these fearful times, is always followed by a sentence. The very existence of this centuries-old institution is now on trial. The sentence comes swiftly. The whispers of the public and the sermons of the preachers soon transform into official action. The tide of opinion has become a political imperative. City councils, guild masters, and local lords, who once profited from unfrequented the baths, now see them as a dangerous liability. The pressure to do something is immense. One afternoon, the town crier, accompanied by a drummer to command attention, stands in the market square. He unrolls a parchment scrolling. In a loud, formal voice, reads a new proclamation from the city council. Citing the spread of the great pox and the moral decay of the populace, he declares that all public bathhouses within the city walls are to be closed, effective immediately. The penalty for any bathkeeper who defies the order is a ruinous fine and imprisonment. The decree sends a shockwave through the town. It's a drastic, almost unthinkable measure. For centuries, the bathhouse has been a central fixture of urban life, as fundamental as the church or the marketplace. To close it is to rip a hole in the social fabric of the city. You walk down the lane towards the bathhouse later that day. The familiar, welcoming glow from the doorway is gone. The heavy oak door, which had always been open, is now shut tight, barred from the inside. The jaunty green bush on the pole, the universal sign of welcome, has been taken down. The building is dark, silent, and forbidding. It looks like a tomb. The bathkeeper and his staff are gone. You wonder what happened to them. To the proprietor who lost his entire business and reputation overnight. To Peter, the barber surgeon, who now has nowhere to practice his grim trade. And especially to the women, who have been cast out. Their home and their livelihood gone, branded as spreaders of disease. They have likely been driven from the town, forced to fend for themselves in a world that is now even more hostile to them. Over the next few weeks, you witness the slow death of a culture. The initial shock gives way to a new, colder, and dirtier reality. The simple, profound pleasure of a hot soak in a cold night is gone. People revert to the old ways of washing a quick splash with a basin of cold water at home. If they're lucky, for most, cleanliness once again becomes a purely theoretical concept. The city seems grimmer, the people more isolated. The central hub where different social classes could mix and mingle has been shuttered. The merchants now make their deals in taverns. The soldiers tell their stories in the barracks, and the gossips whisper on street corners. The social network has been fragmented. The closure of the bathhouses is a topic of great interest to historians of public health and urbanists. Was this the first great public health intervention? A rational if misinformed attempt to stop an epidemic, or was it primarily an act of social control? A moral crusade masquerading as a medical necessity, the consensus among many scholars is that it was a complex mix of both. The fear of syphilis was genuine, but it provided the perfect pretext for authorities to crack down on an institution they had long found morally problematic. The pox gave them the justification they needed to enforce a new, stricter public morality. A fascinating, little-known consequence of the closures was the impact on public water systems. The bathhouses, for all their faults, were major consumers of water and often played a role in the maintenance of the city's elites and channels. With their closure, some of these minor waterways fell into disuse and disrepair, ironically making the overall sanitation of the city even worse in some areas. You see the physical decay of the bathhouse building. A window gets broken and is not repaired. We'd start to grow up around the foundation. The paint on the old sign begins to peel. It's a sad, neglected monument to a bygone era of pleasure and community. The laughter, the music, the splashing, the steam, it's all gone, replaced by an unnerving silence. Occasionally, you hear rumors. I whisper that a certain bathkeeper is running a secret, illicit bath in his cellar for a few trusted clients. But these are just rumors, ghost stories of a lost world, the era of the grand public bath. The communal soak as a central pillar of society is over. The doors have been closed, the fires have gone out, and a chill has settled over the city that has nothing to do with the weather. The world has become a less social, less warm, and perhaps even less clean place. And another powerful force was on the horizon, ready to make sure those doors stayed shut for good. The fear of the great pox bolted the doors of the bathhouse shut, but another, more profound cultural shift would arrive to nail them closed permanently. The world is changing. The unified Christian society of the Middle Ages is cracking apart. A German monk named Martin Luther has challenged the authority of the Pope. And the seismic waves of the Protestant Reformation are beginning to reshape every aspect of European life, right down to the very idea of taking a bath. You feel this change not as a single event, but as a slow, creeping transformation in attitudes. The new Protestant preachers, who are gaining influence in your town, speak with a different kind of fire than the old Catholic priests. Their sermons are less about the 7 deadly sins and more about a new ethos of sobriety, discipline, and hard work. They are building a different kind of world, and there is no room in it for the leisurely, hedonistic culture of the public bathhouse. For these Protestant reformers, the bathhouse represented everything that was wrong with the old, corrupt, Catholic world. They viewed it as a symbol of Roman decadence, a pagan indulgence that had no place in a godly society. Their critique went deeper than just the risk of lust or gluttony. They attacked the very idea of public, communal actions. The human body, in their view, was a vessel of sin that should be covered and controlled, not celebrated and displayed. The casual nudity of the medieval bathhouse was, to them, a source of profound moral and spiritual danger. You hear this new morality being discussed everywhere. Your neighbor, Thomas, who once reveled in the easy companionship of the bath, now speaks of the importance of modesty and self-restraint. He talks about his work as a weaver not just as a job, but as a calling, a way to serve God through diligent labor. The idea of spending an afternoon idly soaking in a tub now seems frivolous, almost sinful. To him, this new Protestant work ethic, as later sociologists would call it, was fundamentally incompatible with bathhouse culture. Time was a gift from God, and it was meant to be used productively. Wasting hours in a stew was an offense against the divine. This new way of thinking elevated work and demoted leisure. The academic debate over the impact of the Reformation on daily life is vast, but most historians agree that it led to a new emphasis on privacy and the nuclear family. The old, communal way of life of which the bathhouse was a prime example was replaced by a focus on the private household as the center of religious and social life. Cleanliness, if it was to be practiced at all, should be a private, family affair, not a public spectacle. A little-known but powerful tool in this cultural shift was the printing press. Protestant reformers were masters of this new technology. They flooded Europe with pamphlets and woodcut illustrations denouncing the sins of the age. The bathhouse was a frequent target. You might see a crude woodcut being passed around, depicting a bathhouse full of grotesque, cavorting figures, with demons gleefully pouring wine and stoking the fires of hell beneath the tub. These images were powerful propaganda, cementing the link between bathing, sin, and damnation in the public mind. This new morality had a direct impact on the now shuttered bathhouse building in your town. The city council, now dominated by men who subscribe to the new Protestant ethos, decides that the building cannot simply be left to rot. It is a symbol of the past that must be erased. They issue an order for its demolition. You watch as a crew of workmen arise with crowbars and hammers. They begin to dismantle the building, timber by timber, stone by stone. They pull down the walls that once echoed with laughter and music. They break apart the great stone tub that once held the entire community in its warm embrace. It feels like watching an execution. This is the final, definitive end. The fear of disease closed the doors. But it was this new, austere religious ideology that tore the building down. The Reformation didn't just change how people prayed, it changed how they lived, how they worked, and how they thought about their own bodies. It created a world that was more private, more disciplined, and much, much less naked. As the last wall of the bathhouse comes crashing down, leaving a cloud of dust and a pile of rubble, you realize an entire way of life has been erased. The very memory of the public bath will be suppressed, written out of the official history and replaced by tales of sin and disease. Europe is entering a new age, and it will be a long, long time before it feels comfortable taking a bath in public again. With the bathhouse reduced to a pile of rubble and the new, austere morality of the Reformation taking hold, A fundamental question arises: how do people stay clean now? The answer is, for the most part, they don't. Not in the way you would understand it. Europe, particularly its upper classes, enters a long period that could be uncharitably described as the Great Unwashed. The very concept of full-body immersion in water becomes associated with risk, both medical and moral. You observe this change most clearly among the wealthy. The local merchant and his family, who once would have been regulars at the bathhouse, now practice a new form of hygiene, a dry clean regimen that focuses on the visible and the fragrant, rather than the truly clean. The key to this new hygiene is linen. The wealthy begin to wear layers of fine, white linen undergarments, shirts for men, chemises for women. These are worn directly against the skin. The theory was that the linen, being a porous plant fiber, would absorb the vile humours and sweat from the body, drawing the dirt away from the skin. Cleanliness was not about washing the body itself, but about frequently changing the linen that touched it. A truly aristocratic person might change their linen shirt multiple times a day. Being clean meant having a closet full of pristine, white linen. This created a new kind of status symbol. The whiteness of your collar and cuffs, peeking out from your expensive outer garments, was the new indicator of wealth and refinement. Water is now used sparingly and with suspicion. A morning ritual for a nobleman might involve a small, ornate porcelain basin brought by a servant. He would dip his fingertips in the water, perhaps splash a little on his face. And that was it. The idea of submerging his entire body was almost unthinkable. Doctors of the period often warned that water could open the pores and allow plagues and miasmas to enter the body. The skin was seen as a protective barrier that should not be compromised by excessive washing. To combat body odor, another new industry booms: perfumery. The aristocracy diffuses itself in powerful, heavy scents. Musk, civet, ambergris, strong, animal-based fragrances are used to mask the underlying reality of an unwashed body. A person's presence is announced by a cloud of expensive perfume long before they enter a room. This practice becomes so extreme that being odorless is considered a sign of poverty. If you didn't smell of perfume, it meant you couldn't afford it. You also see the rise of powders. Servants would dust their masters' and mistresses' bodies with finely milled, scented powders made from starch or rice flour. This was meant to absorb sweat and oil and leave the skin feeling smooth and dry. The elaborate wigs that become fashionable in the 17th and 18th centuries are another part of this dry clean culture. They were a practical solution to the problem of dirty, moist-infested hair. You could simply send your wig out to be cleaned and powdered. A much easier task than trying to wash your own long hair. Historians continue to debate the actual sensory experience of this period. Was every room filled with an overwhelming stench of unwashed bodies and cloying perfume, or was the human nose simply accustomed to a different baseline of smells? The truth is likely somewhere in between. Our modern obsession with a sterile, deodorized world is a very recent invention. A strange and little-known aspect of this phobia of water was the bathing of infants. When adults avoided water, it was still understood that newborn babies needed to be washed. However, medical manuals from the time are filled with anxious instructions about how to do this safely. They recommend using warm wine instead of water to wash the baby, as it was considered less dangerous and more strengthening. Imagine giving a newborn its first bath in a bowl of chardonnay. For the common person, life without the bathhouse is simply grim. They don't have closets full of linen shirts or money for French perfumes. Their single set of woolen clothes gets dirtier and dirtier. They might wash their hands and face in a stream or from a bucket. But full body washing is a rarity. The world becomes a more pungent, and likely more infectious, place. You are living in the aftermath. The communal, water-based, and relatively naked world of the medieval bathhouse has been completely replaced by a private, dry, and elaborately clothed one. Cleanliness has been redefined from a communal experience to a personal and often superficial display of status. The fear of water, born from the pox and sanctified by the Reformation, has created a culture where being clean means changing your shirt, not washing your skin, and it would stay this way for centuries. Years pass. The rubble of the old bathhouse has been cleared away, and a new, sober-looking warehouse has been built in its place. Most people in the town under the age of 20 have no memory of the time when you could pay a few coins to soak in a giant tub of hot water. The very idea seems outlandish. A story from a decadent, almost mythical past. And yet, the memory doesn't die completely. It goes underground, surviving in whispers, legends, and small, hidden pockets of resistance. You start to hear stories, rumors passed between old-timers in the back rooms of taverns. They say that the tradition of the bath is not entirely dead, just hidden from the watchful eyes of the preachers and the city council. The legend goes that some of the old bath keepers, driven out of business, set up clandestine operations in the cellars of private homes or in secluded spots outside the town walls. These weren't the grand public institutions of before. They were small, secret, and exclusive. A wealthy merchant, unwilling to give up the simple pleasure of a hot bath, might have a large wooden tub installed in his cellar. On certain nights, he would invite a few trusted friends for a secret soaking session. It was a conspiratorial act, a small rebellion against the new austerity. The risk of being discovered was part of the thrill. Other stories tell of a more rustic survival. A farmer living near a natural spring in the woods might build a simple, wattle and daub hut around it, creating a primitive, secret spa. People from the nearby villages, suffering from aches and pains, would sneak out at night to seek the healing properties of the water, away from the judgmental eyes of the community. These places become part of local folklore, imbued with a magical, almost pagan quality. They are the domain of folk healers and midwives, not official physicians. The academic world refers to this phenomenon as cultural persistence. Even when a dominant culture or ideology tries to stamp out a practice, it can survive in submerged, altered form. The memory of the bathhouse, with its potent combination of pleasure, health, and sociability, was too strong to be erased entirely. It simply adapted, becoming more private and secretive. One of the most fascinating and hard to trace aspects of this underground survival is the link to traveling communities, groups like tinkers, entertainers, or certain nomadic peoples, who were already on margins of society and less concerned with the dominant morality, may have preserved bathing traditions that the settled population had abandoned. They might set up temporary bath tents near rivers as they traveled, carrying on the old ways in a mobile format. Proving this, however, relies on piecing together fragmentary accounts and reading between the lines of official records that were often hostile to such groups. The bathhouse also survives in language. The old words for the baths, like stews or bagneos, linger on, but their meanings have shifted. They are now used almost exclusively to refer to brothels. The connection between bathing and illicit sex, which was only one facet of the original institution, has become its entire legacy in the popular imagination. The bathhouse's reputation has been permanently tarnished, its more wholesome aspects forgotten. You see a reflection of this in the arts. A playwright might write a comedy where a foolish character is tricked into going to a bagnio, only to be robbed and humiliated. The bathhouse has become a theatrical trope, a shorthand for a place of danger and moral corruption. The complex reality of the institution has been flattened into a caricature. This underground legacy ensures that the flame is never completely extinguished. It flickers on in secret cellars, in woodland springs, in the memories of the old, and in the very language people use to talk about sin. The grand public form is gone, but the private desire for the comfort of a hot bath remains. It's a reminder that you can tear down a building, but it's much harder to demolish a deeply ingrained human habit. The idea of the bath is just waiting, biding its time in the shadows, waiting for the world to change once again and for the fear of water to finally subside. It will be a long wait, but the legend ensures that when the time comes, people will remember how it used to be done. Generations pass. The world you knew, the world of thatched roofs and muddy lanes, has vanished. Let's fast forward through the centuries, past the age of wigs and revolutions, into a time that feels much closer to your own the modern era. The fear of water has long since subsided, replaced by a new scientific understanding of hygiene, germs, and sanitation. The private bathroom is now a standard feature in most homes. But what became of the physical remains of the world you left behind? What echoes of the old bathhouse can be found beneath the paved streets and concrete foundations of a modern city? You are now with a team of archaeologists. They are on a construction site in the heart of what was once your medieval town. A new office building is going up. But before the foundation can be poured, the archaeologists have been called in to investigate what lies beneath. They dig carefully, methodically, peeling back layers of soil that are like pages in a history book. They go past the clay pipes of the Victorians, through the brick foundations of the 18th century, until they hit a layer of dark, dense, organic-rich soil. This is the medieval level. And then, one of the diggers calls out, "Our will has struck something hard and flat, not a rock, but something man-made." The team gathers around, carefully brushing away the dirt. A pattern of small, square tiles begins to emerge, some of them still retaining a faint greenish glaze. They have found the floor of a significant medieval building. As they expand the trench, the full story begins to reveal itself. They uncover the stone foundations of a large, circular structure. It's the outline of the great communal tub in the center of the circle. The soil is different silt here, darker, filled with the debris of centuries of use. This is the accumulated sludge from the bottom of the pool that was never fully cleaned out when the bathhouse was demolished. For the archaeologists, this sludge is a treasure trove. It's a time capsule. They take samples of it back to their lab for analysis. Under a microscope, the past comes to life. They find pollen grains that tell them what plants and trees were growing nearby and what herbs people might have thrown into the water. They find tiny fish scales and bones, evidence of the river water that fed the pool. They find human hairs, fragments of animal bone from the meals that were served, and even the seeds of fruits like figs and grapes that were eaten by the bathers. It's a complete sensory profile of the medieval bath. The debate among archaeologists often revolves around interpreting these finds. Does a high concentration of expensive, imported fruit seeds indicate a wealthy clientele? Or were these treats more common than previously thought? Can the type of pollen tell us what season the bathhouse was most active in? Every handful of dirt is a puzzle. Back at the dig site, they find more tangible artifacts. In a corner of the foundation, they unearth a small pile of discarded objects, a broken pottery jug, probably used for wine, a simple leather shoe, perfectly preserved in the anaerobic mud, and a small, carved wooden token with the number XI burned into it. You recognize it instantly. It's a clothing token, just like the one you clutched so tightly on your first visit. Holding it, the archaeologist can almost feel the anxiety of the medieval bather, hoping his tunic would be safe while he soaked. One of the most exciting finds is a collection of stray gills, the curved metal scrapers. They are corroded and green with age, but unmistakable. These simple tools, found in the context of the bath, are definitive proof of what this building was. They also find a few coins, dropped by clumsy fingers centuries ago, which help to date the period of the bath's operation. A particularly poignant and rare find might be something like a single, elegant hairpin made of bone, found near the foundations of what would have been the women's section. It's a small, personal object that speaks volumes about the other parallel world that existed within these walls, a silent testament to the women who came here to talk, to groom, and to find fellowship. Standing at the edge of the excavation, looking down at the ghostly outline of the stone tub and the scattered remnants of its life, you feel a profound connection to the past. This isn't just a story anymore. It's real. The stones, the toils, the lost objects, they are the physical echoes of the laughter, the gossip, the business deals, and the medical procedures you witnessed. The archaeologists are not just digging up a building, they are uncovering a lost world, a whole social ecosystem, and through their careful work, the silent, forgotten bathhouse begins to tell its story once again. leaving the archaeological dig behind. You step back into the familiar landscape of the 21st century. The world is filled with light, speed, and a pervasive sense of cleanliness that would have been utterly alien to your medieval friends. And yet, as you walk down a modern commercial street, you see a sign that feels like a faint echo from the past. It's for a day spa. The sign promises hydrotherapy, sauna, massage, and a tranquil social experience. The words have changed, but the core concept feels strangely familiar. You decide to go in. The atmosphere is an almost comical inversion of the medieval bathhouse. Instead of a boisterous, muddy entrance, there is a hushed, minimalist lobby with trickling water fountains and the scent of eucalyptus soil. The attendant at the counter doesn't boom a welcome but speaks in a reverent whisper. Everything is spotlessly clean, sterile, and individually portioned. You are handed a plush, white towel and a key for a private locker. The contrast is stark, but the underlying human need being catered to is exactly the same: a desire to step out of the stressful, everyday world and into a sanctuary of water and warmth. You make your way to the communal bathing area. Here, you see the modern descendants of the great medieval tub. There's a hot tub, bubbling with chlorinated, perfectly clear water. There's a cold plunge pool, a steam room, and a sauna. People are here, just as they were 700 years ago, using heat and water to relax their bodies and soothe their minds. But the social dynamic is completely different. People sit in the hot tub in a state of quiet, solitary reverence. They avoid eye contact. Some scroll on waterproof phones. The boisterous, interconnected community of the medieval bath has been replaced by a collection of individuals pursuing personal wellness in parallel. The social network is gone. The services offered are also a fascinating reflection of this evolution. Instead of a barber surgeon with a frightening set of pliers, there are licensed massage therapists and estheticians offering facials and seaweed wrap. The old, humoral idea of purging the body of bad fluids has been replaced by a new, pseudoscientific language of detoxing and releasing toxins. The words are different, but the fundamental, unproven concept of sweating out impurities remains a powerful selling point. This is a topic of some amusement and debate among medical historians: how modern wellness culture often unconsciously repackages ancient, discredited medical ideas in new, attractive wrapping. You see a man emerge from the sauna, his skin red and glistening with sweat. He looks invigorated and pleased with himself, just like the men stepping out of the steam rooms of the past. He believes he has done something fundamentally good for his health, sweating out the stresses and poisons of modern life. He is participating in the same ancient ritual, just with better plumbing and a different theoretical justification. Even the more underground aspects of the medieval bath have their faint, modern echoes. The word spa itself is a source of some historical controversy. The popular story is that it's an acronym for the Latin phrase salus per aque, warm health through water. Most historians, however, agree that this is a Bacronian acronym invented after the fact. The term almost certainly comes from the town of Spoor in Belgium, which has been famous for its natural springs since Roman times. This debate over the origin of a single word highlights how we constantly try to legitimize and romanticize our relationship with these ancient practices. You sit in the steam room, the modern, eucalyptus-scented steam filling your lungs. You close your eyes. If you listen carefully, past the soft New Age music, you can almost hear the echoes of the past. The distant laughter of the merchants, the clang of the barber surgeon's tools, the melody of the minstrel's lute. You realize that while surfaces change dramatically, the fundamental human desires remain remarkably constant. We still seek warmth in a cold world. We still seek community, even if we now find it in more isolated ways. And we still, after all these centuries, put a profound and slightly irrational faith in the healing power of a good, hot soak. The medieval bathhouse may be gone, but its spirit, in a faint and highly sanitized form, lives on. It's time to go. You've seen it all. You felt the biting cold of a medieval night in the glorious, bone-deep warmth of the communal tub. You've navigated the muddy streets, witnessed the casual brutality of humoral medicine, and listened in on the secrets that flowed as freely as the wine. You saw a culture at its vibrant, chaotic peak, and you watched as fear and piety conspired to bring it all crushing down. You've seen the long, dry silence that followed, and you've stood at the edge of a pit, watching archaeologists story back together from dust and broken pottery. You find yourself standing, once more, in front of the empty lot where the bathhouse once stood. The warehouse that replaced it is gone now, too, replaced by the glass and steel of a modern building. But in your mind's eye, you see the original structure. You see the warm light spilling from its oak door. You hear the muffled sounds of life from within. It's an invitation. But this time, you don't go in. You just stand and watch. You think about the housekeeper, that master of a morally grey universe, a pragmatist, an entrepreneur, a purveyor of confidence in. His world was so tangible, so full of strong smells and loud noises, of real-life connections forged in a shared, murky pool. He and his clients weren't concerned with abstract notions of hygiene, they were concerned with the immediate, pressing needs of the body and the soul, the need for warmth, for community, for a brief escape from the harshness of their world. You think of the paradox of it all. This place of cleansing was, by modern standards, incredibly dirty. This hub of health was a theater for dangerous medical procedures and, eventually, a vector for a terrifying disease. This center of community was also a place of exploitation and illicit commerce. It was a perfect microcosm of the medieval world, deeply human, full of contradictions, vibrant, dangerous, beautiful, and squalid all at once. The story of the bathhouse is not just a story about hygiene. It's a story about how societies define what is clean and what is dirty, what is healthy and what is sick, what is moral and what is immoral. And it's a story about how those definitions can change with dizzying speed. A place of sanctuary can become a place of sin in the blink of a historical eye, all because of a new disease or a new idea. The great historical debate will never be fully settled, where the bathhouse is a sign of a surprisingly sophisticated and socially integrated medieval urban culture. As some revisionist historians argue, or were they the decadent, pestilent cesspools that the reformers and moralists claimed? The answer you've arrived at, having seen it all, is that they were, of course, both. They were complex human institutions, and they resist simple labels. You turn away from the sight, leaving the ghosts of the bathhouse to their eternal, steamy conversations. You walk away from the noise, the grime, the laughter, and the fear. You are stepping out of that world for the last time, back into your own. But the memory of the walls, the feeling of that hot, communal water, stays with you. It's a reminder of a lost world of shared, public intimacy, a world that, for all its dangers and its dirt, knew something profound about the simple, human joy of coming together to escape the cold. You leave it behind, a silent, half-forgotten ruin in the landscape of history. Its steam finally, and forever, dissipated into the air. And so, our journey through the warm, murky waters of the past comes to a gentle close. The echoes of laughter and splashing begin to fade now, replaced by a soft and quiet stillness. The thick steam that clouded your vision for so long thins out, like a morning mist burning off in the sun, leaving behind only the calm, steady rhythm of your own breathing. You can feel the weight of your own comfortable bed, the softness of your own pillow. The cold, muddy streets of the 14th century are a world away, a distant dream. Let the last remnants of the story drift away now, like stray hairs floating on the surface of that ancient pool. There are no more details to remember, no more lessons to learn. There is only the quiet comfort of this moment. Here in the dark, feel the gentle pull of sleep, like a warm tide drawing you out into a calm and peaceful sea. Every breath you take is a soft wave, washing you further and further from the shores of wakefulness. You are safe, you are warm, and you are drifting peacefully towards your own dreams, into a world of your own making. The stories of the past are now just gentle murmurs in the background, a soft and steady hum to guide you into a deep and restful sleep. Let go. The end of the article. Good night.